Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Stephen Van Otterstein. Thank you for joining me again today as we do the chapter review for chapter 13 of the book I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. The book we did the actual reading out of was this one right here. Let's see if we can get it in focus. There we go. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen, 1934 printing. The one that we will be doing the review out of is right here, though. Okay, This Believing in False Gods, I Was a Pagan. It is a facsimile reprint of the actual book, and it goes page for page with the other one that I just read, and I can highlight this one. So I highly suggest you go ahead, get yourself one of these if you want to read, mark it up, highlight it, write in it. That's what I do. But it's a fantastic book, and it's been really great getting to go through this with you guys. So go ahead, give us a like on our Facebook page. We do have an Instagram. I've been updating sporadically here. Follow us on YouTube. I also am on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. So check us out there as well. So let's go ahead and get into this chapter. I say it like that because it was kind of a heavy chapter to go through, right? Especially here in the United States. Well, honestly, all over the world, there's so many elections that are happening and the political climate is so charged. So it was quite appropriate to be able to actually do this chapter, but it brought to light a couple of things that are interesting to me and that are still problems today. And this was written in 1934. So I find that very interesting. We're still human beings and we still haven't figured this thing out. So the chapter 13 title is called The Business of New Deals, in quotes. And the subtitle is politics. So here we go. So, and it was interesting how he started it off, because he started it off with a phrase that so many people say today, which is the choosing between the lesser of two evils thing, which many have been saying for multiple election rounds. And it's been very divisive as to what's going on and who is friends with who. And it's deciding a lot of social dynamics and everything like that. A lot of friendships and family relationships have been, and even romantic marriages have even split up over this political climate right now, which is insane to me. But it is what it is, I guess. But and he talks about how when he was in this state of mind, and he associates himself to the what can you do about it party, which so many people find themselves a part of these days, that just reserved to whatever, it's it's all going to be the same anyway type of situation. And when we take a look at that, or when we have that mindset, right, he talks about how we go into it with like a complete loss of faith in the system. And this is just in the first paragraph, this is all coming from there. Complete almost loss of faith in the system. And then so we make decisions based on what's going to have the least impact on me, which is a very selfish and self-centered way to look at it. And you might say, well, of course, that's your political opinion. It's going to be selfish and self-centered. But reading this, he just brings up a great point, right? So we make a decision based on selfish ends rather than what is right. Now, I know that's where people's opinion will differ, is what they consider is right. And it just creates such a toxic environment because it's still selfish. The way many people are thinking about it, when you go into it with this hopeless mindset or this self-serving mindset, right? And you're not trying to be objective and make good decisions about what's actually going on and trying to be involved in a larger picture. You're just like, hey, me, 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 me. There's a big problem with that, right? You're making very selfish decisions in a very large picture. And The thing is, though, this isn't new. I laugh during the reading video. When I go through to do these reviews, I watch the episode before to get the reading, and I follow along and I do the highlighting and the note taking and everything then, because it helps me to hear it and then be following along. Whatever, I have my own process, but but I laughed during the reading video because what happens is he just gives a story that illustrates how, like, when cavemen were voting for something, and he was in the Paleolithic party or something like that, and how it's always been this way, how it's always been this promise of all of these amazing things and these grandiose ideas, and life's going to change for everybody and it's going to be better for everybody, and everyone's doing it, and then whoever wins doesn't follow through anyway. Like, this is not a new thing. This is how politics works. This is why people are so disillusioned by politics. This is why people do think it's the lesser of two evils, right? Because that's what we've been given for so long, and that's how it's been running for so long. And what's interesting is he's giving us some context to say, hey, we don't need to necessarily beat ourselves up about this, but because it's been going on for a while, but we need to figure out a better way to do it too, right? Like, there's only so many excuses we can make. When we continue to advance as a society, we need to figure out better ways to do everything. And there's been some evolution in the political systems, of course. And I'm not a politician or someone that is well versed on all of the political aspect of living yet, or the political world, better way to say it. But I like the perspective he brings into this, that these are not new problems, and we're in the constant pursuit of resolving this stuff, right? And but what's interesting is he goes on and where did he say it? Okay. It wasn't in this section actually. But he goes on to talk about, like, give some examples. But the first one he gave was Moses, and then he brings into this brings into the frame that even a people led by a godly, God-inspired person still were not God followers themselves, right? So they therefore screwed things up for 40 years right on the edge of the promised land, I think is what he said, right? 40 years in the wilderness in consequence. Moses was a guided leader who did not have guided followers. And that's a perspective I didn't even consider, right? Like, people want to have maybe leaders with a certain faith or a faith at all, just for a guide in morality, maybe. And what we need to realize is that's great. But if we don't have people of the same mindset to follow, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Nothing will change with that, because people are still going to be selfish and demanding that even a God-inspired leader cater to the selfish whims. And that's an interesting perspective to take. And he goes on and he talks about this with Abraham Lincoln, how they embraced took the government of, by, and for the people, but forgot that Abraham Lincoln said under God, new birth under God. So it's been there has been leaders that have been God inspired, or leaders that have been of that of a Christian orientation, or throughout the ages, different religious orientations, right? And but the people didn't follow, because the people were still being selfish about it. So when you consider that, it's quite new dimension to bring into it, because when you bring into the fact that the people need to be willing to follow in the direction that God is taking us, and not just what serves their own selfish interests, it gets a little bit more complicated. It gets got some more dimensionality to it. It's got some more depth to the argument, or depth to the problem, let's say, or the circumstance. So I'm going to go ahead and read kind of where he sums it up, sums up the problem, I guess. This is on the bottom of page 188. It's in the middle of the second paragraph. We're going to start, and it says, "We can see now, however, that any kind of national or world recovery depends on cooperation between men." Okay, pretty straightforward. And cooperation without Christ is usually dominated by self-interest. So there's problem truly identified, I think. As soon as it begins to involve any real self-sacrifice, right? As soon as we are personally affected and we have to give something up, and he gives this example, as soon, let us say, as a businessman sees that subscribing to a code is beginning to benefit his competitors more than himself, that particular attempt at cooperation winds up with a bang, meaning it fails, right? It will just fail out. And you might ask why? Well, because people don't like to lose, right? People don't want to get beat. People don't want to look weak. People don't want to feel taken advantage of, right? He explains it here. This is a little bit, a couple pages down. Human beings then revert inact to the self-seeking they never cease to have at heart, right? So the cooperation externally is a forced cooperation for one reason or another. And then when it's over, the threats addressed or the common cause is nullified, then they go back to the selfishness that's still in their heart, right? They throw aside the voluntary cooperation, which was only a short-lived form of enlightened self-interest. They throw aside the nationalism, which was only thinly veiled self-protection. They throw away the ineffective dictator who ruled them. And they find, as a man surrendered to God could have told them in the beginning, that there is no whole-souled and lasting cooperation except in the spirit and love of Jesus Christ. So everything that brings a group of people together that is solely to serve their own self-interest will only be temporary. It will always dissipate. And the only way to truly make progress is to be in the service of something much greater than just individual problem. You know, there's been a lot of things throughout history. The World War specifically is what's coming to mind. Also in the US 9/11, that sense of nationalism really came about. But if you look now, it's almost completely gone in a lot of ways, right? So the issue arises, we rally behind it, and he likes to, I like that, in their own thinly veiled self-protection, right? And not in the justice in the or self-protection in the guise of justice, and then move forward. And then when it's justice is served and mission accomplished, then everyone just goes back to selfishly serving themselves, right? Not really caring about progress, not really caring about forward motion in a lot of ways, and not following through on trying to grow as individuals or as a nation, right? Not just to dominate others, but to grow spiritually together in that sense, which is quite a task, I understand, but I do think it's possible. So, and so these times of camaraderie are almost always short-lived, and so he's identified this problem. It's just always selfishness being served in the political arena. So let's talk about that. Let's continue on past that last line I read about accepting the spirit and love of Jesus Christ, right? Because that's not for their own selfish interests. It's to do the right thing out of a sense of love for the God of your understanding. And he will use Jesus Christ a couple of times in this reading. In this book, it's very heavily Christian, and I understand that. But please don't let that turn your ears off. Don't let that prejudice yourself against it. This is a lot of good information. So remember to just bring in the God of your understanding, the practice of your own personal religion of your choosing. So let's read this last part, though. A personal recovery act beginning with a surrender of self-will and continuing through all phases of self-sacrifice, I like that, all phases of self-sacrifice, is the only act which can lead to an absolute theocracy, a government with a God-appointed and God-guided leadership, and a nation of God-guided followers all down the line. Now, excuse that. Didn't mean that to happen. First part, really like sacrificing self. Well, this is a personal journey. We got to get down the base level here, right? We have to be, as individuals, take personal responsibility to follow the will of God in our lives, to actually execute on these principles, on these virtues, and be moving forward. And then when you change the bottom, when you grow in this spirituality at the roots level, it will automatically translate up as more and more do it, right? So that's what he's saying here. He says some stuff that has been commonly associated with some pretty scary people, right? That are pretty scary circumstances. A theocracy, God-appointed and God-guided leadership, and a nation of God-guided followers, right? That dictators claim the title of God-appointed throughout history regularly. And those dictatorships can be horrific. So this is something that causes a lot of hesitation, I'm sure, in some. We go on to talk about what he means by that later on, thankfully. But I wanted to stop and acknowledge how that actually sounds, right? Because it's the self-appointed dictators will use that claim. I'm God-appointed. I'm here as in the God sent me here. And that can be quite intimidating. But thankfully or not even intimidating, that can cause some apprehension with what he's going to be talking about going forward. But the reality of it is as we dig into this whole thing, we'll get some clarity around what that actually means. It's not, hey, I'm going to say God appointed me to do it, so I'm going to go do it. That self-will run riot. That's a lot of self-absorption, right? But so we'll get into it. But I did like the surrender of self-will on an individual level, right? And I love that he's talking about this in 1934. This is what definitely needs to happen here today in today's society. People need to sacrifice their self-will to continue to move forward in a healthy way. Everybody, not just leaders too, right? And that looks like living by a principled life, living by a virtuous life as well. So there's a lot of great stuff there, but yeah, definitely wanted to address the verbiage there. So I'm lost in my notes. I'm referencing my notes right now. Excuse me, everybody. So then he goes into, okay. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. So, and also you have to believe, or you have to have some consideration for, that's why I got lost in my notes. I forgot to turn the page. Never forget to turn the page, guys. Anyway, that you have to have this spiritual experience yourself, and then you have to make the determination, and if you can actually receive guidance in some way from that God of your understanding, because some people truly do. Many people truly do. Doesn't necessarily come as a booming voice, but mere suggestion. And then there's other people that give pause to those who say they do and don't believe it's possible, right? So he's speaking about theocracy and everything going forward with the belief and structure to say, hey, this is there is a way for us to actually grow and build and receive instruction from the God of our understanding. So and he brings this theocracy in, and then he gives an example of why he thinks it would work, right? This isn't just unfounded necessarily. And the reason he believes it would work is his experience with the Oxford group, right? And the Oxford group has a very particular way of governing themselves and deciding what steps to take, where to move forward to, things like that. So he gives a little bit of an overview of the Oxford group here that I'm going to read. It's on page 192. And how in this part, it jumps in with talking about how even the membership of the Oxford group is made up. So those who are leading Christ-centered lives, asking God to make them absolutely honest, absolutely loving, absolutely pure, and absolutely unselfish, four absolutes of the Oxford group. Those who are living as life changers under God's control are members, whether they know it or not, right? Like, to be a member of the Oxford group, you have to practice those absolutes to actually have a willingness to sacrifice your self-will and follow God's will by living a certain way of life, right? So there's a lot of people that can be members of the Oxford group without having to make any declaration. It's to be a member of the Oxford group means to just follow that way of life. Know it or not. And those who are not those who do not lead that kind of life are not members, no matter how loudly they may claim to be, right? So I think that's quite interesting, right? Like, so to actually give that give that set of requirements to be a part of the Oxford group and actually partake in the business of the Oxford group executes or partakes in, right? That's what you got to do. You got to live by the four absolutes and be willing to serve God's will. And so to be a part of the Oxford group, you have to submit yourself to the four absolutes and certain lifestyle, meaning like prayer, meditation, and following God's will in your life. So given that is the makeup of it, he goes in to talk about how they have no permanent leaders anymore, right? They don't have any specific figureheads, right? And he talks about how the leadership can change day to day, right? Depending on what tasks need to be done and who gets appointed for those tasks can change. And somebody that's leading a major meeting or a major project today can tomorrow be opening windows. And what's awesome is he gives an actual example of this. He talks about a guy named Frank Buckman. Frank Buckman. Let me enunciate that and make sure you could get it. It's Buckman. And who was the founder of the Oxford group. So he's somebody that exemplifies this ideal and this way of life, right? And he actually wrote a book called Remaking the World. And the Oxford group actually, from my understanding, got renamed to the Moral Rearmament Group. I don't think it was called group, but something like that. So, but a book called Remaking the World by Frank Buckman. I have the book. I have not read the book. Actually, it's this one right there that's tipped over. Let me see. I'm looking at the video. Down, right. There. So anyway, not that matters. But so I've got the actual book. And I plan on reading it at some point. Maybe that'll be one we do cover on here if I like it. But so he can be somebody that's opening windows the next day, right? And he has been that person. I think that's an amazing thing to keep in mind. Like one person elected, like it has that spirit of rotation and that they talk about in 12-step groups, the rotation of service, things like that. But also in our American government, there's supposed to be that spirit of rotation too. Though there's not as much as some would prefer, there it still is, which is, I believe, a healthy thing to have. And I like also how he he talked about here, how sometimes the leader that gets selected is not the one that, or the leader that gets selected is the one that's right for the job, or by either supremely qualified or is the one that needs the growth for that job, right? So meaning, hey, this person needs to do it so he can grow and get the skill set he needs, right? Those types of things. So it's interesting that it can be one or the other, and I actually really like that. And it's very service oriented, growth, building up people, and involvement of people too, right? Everyone has their role, he talks about in here. So I think that's an important thing to actually remember too. So I also want to just point this part out because this is a part we've lost in our own politics today. And he makes it a point to say that they don't backbite each other. They don't call out each other's deficiencies, which is not a principle that's practiced at all today. This is on page 193 at the bottom. Similarly, God is our only judge. To tell another man what is the matter with him is, as God has shown us, worse than useless. Worse than useless. Isn't that amazing? Like everyone today thinks that it's their prerogative and their priority to go tell someone about themselves, and it's really not. It's really not. We merely incur his resentment, expressed or suppressed, and accomplish nothing. When we're sitting here pointing fingers, wagging fingers, and talking about each other's character, nothing gets done. When we sit in quiet time, however, and let God tell us of our sins, we are not only convicted by his judgment, but moved to do something about it. Okay, so the reason that they can practice this is because everybody is living this way of life by the four absolutes. So if somebody has an error in behavior, it is it will hopefully be brought to their attention during their prayer and meditation time and be brought to the surface. Either way, it's not our business, but hopefully they see that. Should it be something they need to see? So just as mine are mine to look at too, right? Like this isn't a pointing fingers. I have to look at my own conduct. I have to look at my own behavior. If you're a 12-step person, this is 10, 11, 12, all wrapped into this actually, because this is constant inventory. This is prayer and meditation. This is service. This is practicing the principles everywhere, right? Like this is 10, 11, and 12 work at its finest, we're going to say, going into the political realm. So, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out, brought that in there. I needed that reminder as well. So now getting to the point here, he starts talking about how this election works. This selection more is a better way to say it, and how a leader is selected. And it's through, so when you have a practice of a people having private prayer and meditation and to set their day correctly, practicing principles, and then they all meet together, what he says they would do is they would have a group meditation, really is what it is. And then they would ask God to guide their thoughts and their actions regarding a certain suggestion that it is. It could be whatever they needed guidance on, selection of a leader, selection or the how to address a project, how to help somebody, how to what's the perspective we need to take on political issues, things like that. They would actually ask that in a group meditation, and then they would have a discussion about what people actually received and kind of piece it together that way, right? So I find that very interesting that they would actually do it that way. So they would concentrate on principles, and they would meditate on the situations and then have the discussion. So it's a elected person, but through what would be called a collective conscious, meditative conscience, right? Everyone gets to vocalize what was brought up for them in meditation. Kind of a very interesting, unique, and beautiful thing to consider, because I'm a true believer in meditation and the power of it. So to have a group meditation focused on a single principle of action, quite a power. I'm sure those were quite powerful rooms to be in, actually. And so he starts really kind of talking about all this selection process, and he says something that I think is very important. He does point out that everybody has a purpose that's participating in that project, that's actually involved in the Oxford group, right? It's important to know that every position in a place of service is an important one. That's something that's talked about a lot in the 12-step world, but also in the mental health world, and also just in the character building, life coaching world, is to be of service, to help something be built and grow. And that can be as small as just opening a gas station door for somebody, right? That could be as small as just shooting someone a text to say, hey, I'm thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. All right. Like with no expectation of a return text, right? Just to let someone know they're being thought of, and thought of fondly and in a positive way. That's a blessing, actually, right? So service covers so much, and it's all so important, right? Some positions might be designated as more important by our society and our opinions, but we need to make sure that it's not our opinion of the importance of a place of service doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It's the service itself that we really need to take into consideration as being important, not what kind of service. So he gives all of this as an example to really show, or to really try to illustrate, why he thinks this type of selection would be something that our government today and our political dynamic today could function off of, right? So this isn't the normal type of theocracy that we've seen happen, or the dictatorships that we've seen self-appointed. So this is something that's collectively decided upon by the group of people involved, and then is only ever temporary for that specific instance of leadership needed. It is not a default permanent role. This is just all based on the group conscious of that time. And yes, of course, there can be selfishness that gets involved. There can be misalignment that can happen. But that's why it's important that from the ground up, this needs to be a personal sacrifice of self-will for this growth, right? There's a lot that has to go in before we get to this point. But he's saying this would be the best way to actually get a true and healthy functioning society with growth and positivity available to all involved. And I think you might be onto something. We aren't anywhere close to that. It's something that I think we need to continue to pursue today, but we might be getting closer. Getting closer. I wanted to bring in another thing. He used the word followership as well. There's a lot of places that use the term fellowship for the group of people that is associated, but he used the word followership, and I really enjoyed that because it's a little bit different, and it implies that they are following something greater than themselves, the God of their understanding. If you're in a certain affiliation to that group and the building up and the growth of that group, right? So it's a followership, a group of people with the same goals and intentions, with the same practices. And I think that's great. So, but yeah, there's this great quote that I wanted to read. When they, and I wanted to mention it because it's, so many people try to scare someone into changing, or people try to scare themselves into changing, right? Oh man, this might happen. This might happen. This might happen. And I know in the rooms of 12-step, everyone says you can't scare an alcoholic. You can't scare a drug addict, right? But even people without those specific problems, you can't scare somebody really into doing anything. You might get them to have a temporary period of abstinence from a behavior, but the sense of change really has to come from within, right? And most of our unhealthy behaviors are fueled by selfishness and fear, primarily self-centered fear, right? And it's interesting because he brings up the point, like, we can't scare people into changing into this. It doesn't work that way. It has to be a loving thing. And the quote that he put in here is, can one fear be used to cancel out another? Can the devil, as Jesus said, be used to drive out the devil, right? Like, you can't. Negative, it can never be used to combat negative. The only way you can combat that negativity is with positivity and love and an invitation to change. And when you do that, it can actually take a fully rooted and holistic change rather than just someone abstaining from a behavior. So it's just something to keep in mind. Something to keep in mind as we go forward. And for those of us that want to actually, hopefully, grow enough personally to help others grow personally too. That's why I do this, is to hopefully share that journey with you guys and my understandings and the growth I'm I'm encountering as I go through this book too again, right? This is, I'm finding more stuff and more things that are helping me get clarity as well. So it's definitely something to remember as we're trying to affect change in this world. And then he goes on a little bit about how Congress is a group of elected representatives, but it's not God's will that's represented. It's human beings' will. So it's all, like in the US, it's the entire government is represented to provide the most effect on a selfish and self-centered will, which is kind of true. At one point, I think it was much more Christian oriented, much more God centered and God oriented, but today it is not. It's much more a selfish and self-centered government. I do believe it can be lifted back up and maybe realigned. But that, again, is going to come at a realignment of the people, not, it won't start from the top down. It has to start from the bottom up, everybody. We got to get better on this. So he was talking about that, and he goes into how this group has already started to affect this change, right? He talks about the continents that's on. He's talked about the government officials and the people in high places that have actually had these spiritual awakenings and are practicing this way of life, and how they're actually having an impact in certain ways. And how he talks about New Zealand and South Africa and England and all of these international conferences and these government conferences, and that it's possible to actually have these change, right? And it can have an impact. I feel like the 2 world wars really changed our course in the spirituality realm. I've been thinking that for a while. And kind of bottomed us out in the God reliance, just because of the amount of death that happened. And people became fearful and self-centered and selfish and wanted to protect themselves, which is understandable. It's a world war why that thinking would come about. But I do think we were derailed from beginning to institute a more God-centered lifestyle, God-centered world economy, world political forum. So, but it isn't hopeless. It's not hopeless. It can happen. It's happened before where it started to work. It can happen again. It just takes the people getting involved with this whole thing. So, it's definitely not hopeless, but because there's something we can do as individuals. We can lift ourselves up. We can have that sacrifice of self-will and have these spiritual experiences and actually try the best of our ability to live a God-centered lifestyle. And then we bring that into the rest of the world after we've done that, right? So I'm going to read this last thing from page 200. It becomes very clear, therefore, that you and I can do what you and I can do about rotten politics, about national recovery, and about threatened revolution. It is the very thing that members of the Oxford group are doing. We can, in other words, surrender our wills to God and get ourselves right with Him. God then can use us to win others to Christ, and Christ can confer citizenship on ever-increasing numbers in the kingdom of God. It is a matter not of getting votes, but of winning men. It is not a problem. It is a problem not of electioneering, but of evangelism. So, it starts with the individuals. It starts with us changing. It starts with our willingness to live differently. And through that change of ourselves, others are attracted to it. And we bring others into it. And eventually, the world starts to change. We change ourselves, we change our families, we change our households, we change our communities, we change our cities, our states, our government, our areas, whatever it is you're a part of. But it starts individually every single time, right? And so that's what we can do to help affect this change. So, all right, well, there we go. That's my review of that chapter. There's a lot in there, and it's just such a politically charged environment right now. I hope you guys found that beneficial. I know I did, just to know that we're not crazy, and these are problems we've been trying to fix for a long time, and it's we're working towards it. I think we really are working towards it. So I appreciate y'all. Again, give us a like, give us a subscribe, go to our Facebook page, Spotify, whatever you'd like to follow us on. We'd appreciate it. Thank you for the support that you constantly give this channel. And the next chapter reading is Chapter 14, This Business of Remaking the World. Sociology. Ooh, I am very interested to do that one. Excited about that. So yeah, there we go. Appreciate y'all. And until next time, thanks.